Hello, everybody. My name is Juan Orlandini. I'm Insight's Chief Architect for the Cloud and Data Center Solution Area.
And I'm Clay Heuckendorf, Senior Architect for Insight's Cloud and Data Center Transformation.
So the session today is to talk about really the key considerations for data protection, but from a developer perspective, all right? So Clay and I both come from a deep, long history of doing data protection as infrastructure IT guys. But what we've actually seen is that has actually changed. The way IT wants to be consumed, or the developers want to consume IT, is far, far different than it was when I started my career. Back then, you had a silo of teams that operated almost independently. You had the backup people, you had the storage people, you had the networking people, you had the security people, and sometimes you met and developed the stuff together. Then you saw a little bit of a convergence when the virtualization stuff started happening and with VMware, and you had to have somebody that understood a little bit of everything that was included. But really what was missed is that the developer was not included in that conversation. And that's actually the dramatic shift that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years. The way I like to position this is, why is it that the cloud has grown so rapidly? And it's because it really is a developer-first approach to IT. There was an article that was just published last week from Amazon where they celebrated 15 years of S3. And the very first thing that they said is, what we set out to do was to set up a set of API for developers to consume storage. So they literally focused on the developer first. And the developers liked it, so they went and consumed it. And now IT is trying to understand is, hey, how do we go about doing the exact same thing for our IT services? And backup is more critical now than ever before. We've all seen the ransomware, and Clay, you've actually been part of some of those recovery scenarios for some of our clients.
I have.
And I mean, some of them are terrible. They actually understand the data protection tools themselves, right, and hack them. You have an example of that, don't you?
Yeah, I do, where we actually saw the data protection environment being targeted first before they went over and started the malicious activities with some of the production data. So the data protection infrastructure has definitely been top of mind for most organizations.
Yeah, so we got to worry about it from the perspective of that there's a set of things that traditional IT and services that brings to the table that we need to continue to bring to the table, but we got to look at it from the developer's lens, where, and I'm going to use a little colloquial terminology here, where the developer exists here, then there's an API, and then there's magic, and IT is really magic. That's what we should shoot ourselves to be, right? And importantly, the magic should be pretty comprehensive, because what developers want to consume now is not the same stuff that we used to consume in the past, right? So developers are now consuming sets of services that are being exposed by the cloud operators or cloud-like operators, so IT teams. And that could be Kubernetes. It could be a storage as a service, a network as a service, security as a service, and that's supremely important, by the way. And all of those things need to be integrated and exposed through a set of APIs. So, Clay, you get a chance to actually play with and work with pretty much all of the major data protection vendors. Is there a common trend in how they're actually shooting towards doing and offering these things?
Yeah, I would definitely think so. And you know, it's interesting when you look at what Amazon did to IT 15 years ago. You're seeing organizations and especially the guys who make the magic happen, as it were, starting to understand that they need to get out of the mentality of this is my silo, or this is my little piece of the pie, and understand it. You use the term as a service, and the manufacturers in the data protection space are really taking that to heart. And how do we enable organizations that are still reliant on that traditional IT type mentality, and be able to service that part of the business, but then also provide that service or as a service to the developers within the organization. So there's a bit of a hybrid that's occurring in the data protection space, but very much trending towards providing that cloud-like or that as a service, so that the folks that make the magic happen can provide a service to the organization, which obviously includes the developers.
So, it's interesting. We have a large portion of our businesses is made up of developers, right? Um, and it was interesting. We were at a conference together, and I was working with one of them who, and he'll remain nameless for good reasons. And he started talking about enterprise Kubernetes at scale, and he got to the data protection portion of his presentation, which we hadn't had a chance to talk about. And he said, "Hey, that problem is solved. Just go download this bit of open source from GitHub, and you'll be good." And and I was like, "Well, you know what? You're exactly right. That data protection problem for you has actually been solved, but has not been solved in the context of the business, right? Because there's the layers of data protection, the 3-2-1 methodologies, all that stuff that us as data protection people have relied on for years, right? And so the challenge is how do we give somebody that's a developer like that an experience that's similar to that, right? It's like, oh, just go download this bit from GitHub, the internal GitHub and that public GitHub that connects to your infrastructure, and off it goes, right?
Right.
And are you starting to see a lot more of that kind of a thing?
We are, and you brought up the conversation that you had, and I think a lot of people think backups are a checkbox, and in some regards they can be a checkbox, right? We are protecting the data, but it really goes back into the idea of governance and what do backups really mean, and what are we trying to protect from? So if we use the ransomware as an example, a developer could very easily say, "Yep, we're protecting this workload," but leave it on an exposed share, and some malicious actor comes through, and now we've lost that component or that service that the developer was providing for the organization or for their clients. We don't have the same type of governance. So again, it's making folks aware and understanding that just because we're doing things and providing an abstraction layer in front of the magic, that a lot of the core principles that those of us in the data protection space have applied for traditional architecture, a lot of those still apply for these microservices and these as a service type offerings that organizations are starting to deploy.
And in the microservices world, there's a lot of things that get shaken up, right? So your database or your persistence layers get changed. So you go from a traditional RDBMS potentially to something that's a NoSQL or a key value store of some sort or whatever it is, right? Those still need to be protected just the same way as we did in the past, right? Just because they might have geodispersals built into them and all that other stuff, that does not prevent a malicious actor coming in and actually breaking all replicas or breaking all copies or corrupting all copies and all that other stuff. So there's a lot of those hard lessons learned that we've had earned over the last 50, 60 years of running IT shops, right? The new platforms, they absolutely are different, but they have the same kind of things. And I think that's what I heard you just talking about, right? Is that you really, the core principles have not changed. We just got to make sure that they're consumable by the new consumers, the developers themselves.
Absolutely. The target audience for data protection has definitely shifted. And again, there are plenty of organizations that still have big iron in their data centers, and they need a way to protect that. But as organizations start deploying things like microservices and containers and some of the new very agile type technologies, it is a different conversations for organizations to have internally. And it's not just install an agent or we're going to do a snapshot here and allow the developers to consume that. It's really understanding the governance around the data and why is it important to protect it, and where are we going to protect it, and do we need to send another copy of that data elsewhere? The idea behind containers is we should be able to stand them up and destroy those very rapidly, and they don't matter. They're providing a very limited service. But to the point you made, is there is persistent storage that's usually sitting behind those, and the developer is just tying into that data so they can do their magic right on the front end with their code, but there still is some core data behind the scenes that that organizations need to make sure that they're protecting. So, how do we provide an interface or again, an abstraction layer where the developer doesn't need to know the magic. They need to understand, I'm consuming a service, I'm providing a service. How do I join those two together and consume it the way that I want to, right? So that's where the RESTful APIs come in and allow them to use some of the tools that they're comfortable with. And then the guys that are making the infrastructure magic happen, how are they providing that service to the organization and really treating it more as an actual service? And again, we've kind of talked about it as, we've seen this trend over the last couple of years where organizations are embracing the idea that Amazon, put in the marketplace. They want to provide these services to their internal users, and the developers. I don't think they really care where it runs. They want to make sure it's easily consumable, and we also want to make sure that the data is being protected. So you've got the developers in their mind, they're consuming resources, and from an infrastructure side of the house, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to consume, but also keeping in mind that we may have some IT governance required for data protection.
Awesome. And I'll tell you, Clay, you and I have been working together for a very long time. And back in the old days, we used to manage things in a very declared and programmatic way. We would say, hey, the backup policy is this, and it includes these attributes, and these are the things that I'm protecting, and all that other stuff, right? What's changed a lot is that a lot of the data protection vendors actually almost universally have gone to more. The old way was imperative. You say exactly what you want to get done. The new data protection methodologies have gone down this declarative path, which is really where you say what the end state should look like. Hey, I want this application protected with this gold policy or whatever it is. Go figure it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually, I think, the kinds of services that I think that you're talking about exposing to the developers, right? Is it's a programmatic set of things that, hey, choose from your catalog. I'm going to worry about the details. And the data protection tools have actually allowed us now recently to do that, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So, in an ideal world or an ideal scenario, a developer is going to request resources, and there's three levels of service that can be provided, and of course there is additional magic that's occurring behind the scenes. And we like to use the term magic, but there is an API call that's being made into the data protection platform. And to your point, it's making sure that we're getting a backup every X, where those very defined things that were true 15 years ago, those are still occurring, but the developer doesn't care, right? The developer wants to know, if I check this box, there's going to be something in the background that's going to provide some of that, the data protection and information governance, where again the infrastructure team is able to manage that on the back end. And to your point, I think almost all of the main providers that are out there are allowing an interface to do that. So whether it's via a RESTful API or maybe it's a plugin to some of the other tools that are out there. ServiceNow is obviously a very popular one. But again, a lot of the software platforms now are providing that automation and orchestration layer, and some of that machine learning and artificial intelligence, which 15 years ago, if you would have said artificial intelligence or machine learning for data protection, I would have laughed at you. And we've now started to see that, and it's become very, very prevalent, where you are providing a framework and allowing the software to do again that magic.
So this is a very short talk that we have, and we're almost out of time, Clay. So I'm just going to wrap it up by saying this has been very theoretical because we've only had a little bit of time. So we just wanted to paint the picture as like, hey, this is the direction where the industry's headed and what we've been doing for our clients. And the way we've been doing this, if you're interested, is there's a whole framework that we've created. We call it Modern IT Operations, ModOps. And the whole premise behind that is that what we want to make is all of IT a developer forward operation. And by developer forward, I'm going to use a foodie term, right? And I am using the foodie term. If you're not a foodie, if you say garlic forward or lemon forward or pepper forward, that's the first thing that you taste when you eat food. What we're working on is and have developed is a modern IT operations practice that is developer forward, so that when the developer goes and talks to IT, it tastes like a developer environment, so they feel comfortable, that they know, hey, this is something that I know how to consume, and they are willing to engage and consume the services that IT brings to the table. Behind the covers, there's still the stuff that we do, right? Which is, how do we stand up the infrastructure? How do we stand up storage, data protection, network security, and all that other stuff? But we abstract it away from the developer so that they can be productive, do the magic that they do. And Clay, I love the fact that you said that, right? They have their own magic that they do, and then we move on, right? So if you want to find out more about that, please feel free to reach out to us. Modern IT operations is the framework that we've built, and it ties into data protection as well as many of the other things that we do in the IT side of the house. So thank you for joining us, Clay. Appreciate your time as always. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you.